The psychic shockwave hit the Imperial dungeon with the force of an orbital bombardment. It was not an explosion of fire, but of pure mental pressure that crushed the air out of the room. Thousands of glass coolant tubes shattered at the same time. The liquid nitrogen hissed as it boiled on the hot metal floor. In the shadows of the vast room, 300 servitors died instantly because their modified brains could not handle the sudden spike in energy. They slumped over their brass stations. The smell of burnt wet meat filled the air. This was the moment history broke. On the steps of the Golden Throne, the Emperor stood up. He did not rise slowly like an old man waking from sleep. He moved with the speed of a striking snake. The golden armor plates on his shoulders ground together with a sound like thunder. He tore the thick psychic cables from his head. Sparks the size of fists rained down on the stone. Constantin Valdor was the Captain General of the Custodian Guard, and he was the fastest warrior alive except for his creator. He had his spear raised before the first spark hit the ground. He looked at his master and saw only cold fire in his eyes. The Emperor was not confused. He was not tired. He was preparing for war. The massive webway gate behind the throne began to rumble. Without the Emperor's mind to hold it shut, the barrier between terror and the warp began to thin. Red warning lights spun in the dark corners of the room. A tech priest of the Mechanicus screamed as his logic coils burned out from the radiation. He fell from a high walkway and hit the ground with a wet crunch. No one looked at him. The sigillite Malcador leaned heavily on his iron staff. He wiped blood from his nose. He looked up at the Emperor. He saw the truth written on the Emperor's face. The dream of a secret war was over. The betrayal had been seen. The War Master Horus was currently in the warp transit to Isstvan, but he had not yet given the order to fire. There was still time. It was a small amount of time. It was less than one standard day. The Emperor stepped down from the dais. His boots cracked the stone floor. He did not speak with a voice. He spoke into the minds of everyone in the room. The command was simple, and it hurt to hear it. He ordered total mobilization. He ordered the psychic beacon of the Astronomicon to shine brighter than it ever had before. He ordered the shutting of the gates. The silence of the Imperial Palace ended. Sirens began to wail across the entire Himalayan mountain range. It was a sound that had not been heard since the Unification Wars. Millions of clerks in the administrative towers stopped their writing. They looked out of windows at the storm clouds gathering over the sanctum. They did not know why they were afraid. They only knew that the heartbeat of the world had skipped. The Emperor walked past Valdor. He did not look back at the unstable gate. He walked toward the heavy blast doors. He had to stop a murder that had not happened yet. The timeline had shifted. The galaxy was about to bleed. Rogal Dorn was the Primarch of the Imperial Fists, and he was building a wall. He stood in the high tower of the Barb Bastion. The wind outside was cold and smelled of ozone and dust. Dorn looked at a map of the Imperial Palace on a glass table. He moved small stone markers with his large yellow hand. He was trying to figure out how to stop an army that did not exist yet. He did not know why he felt the need to fortify the palace so quickly. He just knew he had to do it. The stone door behind him opened. It did not open with the sound of a servo motor. It opened because someone kicked it open. The metal door flew across the room and hit the far wall. It crumpled like a piece of paper. Rogal Dorn spun around. His hand went to the massive chainsword at his hip. He stopped. He saw the Emperor walking into the room. The Emperor was not wearing his golden robes. He was wearing full battle plate. The armor was covered in ancient scratches. His face was hard like granite. He held a sword that burned with fire. The fire was not hot, but it made the air taste like copper. Dorn dropped to one knee. He bowed his head. He had never seen his father look so dangerous. The Emperor did not tell him to rise. The Emperor walked past him to the glass table. He looked at the map. He swept his hand across the table. The stone markers flew onto the floor. Dorn did not flinch. The Emperor spoke. His voice sounded like grinding stones. He told Dorn that the enemy was not coming from the outside. He told Dorn the enemy was already inside. He said the word Horus. The word hung in the air. Dorn felt his heart skip a beat. He wanted to say it was impossible. He wanted to say his brother was a hero. But he looked at the Emperor's eyes. There was no lie in them. There was only terrible truth. The Emperor gave his first order. He told Dorn to seize all ships in the Sol system. He meant every single ship. He meant the cargo haulers. He meant the garbage scows. He meant the luxury yachts of the High Lords. Dorn stood up. He asked what to do if the captains refused. The Emperor said to kill them and take the ships anyway. The timeline had changed. There was no time for law. There was only survival. Dorn nodded. He tapped his Vox bead. He began to issue commands. The tone of his voice changed. He was no longer a builder. He was a soldier. Deep below the surface of Mars, the Fabricator General sat in his iron web. Kelbor Hal was more machine than man. He had metal legs and metal arms and a metal face. He was connected to the central data core of the Red Planet. He felt the psychic scream from terror before he heard any report. It hit his logic circuits like a virus. The data streams turned red. The output from the Imperial Palace showed a massive spike in energy. It was an impossible amount of power. It looked like a second sun had turned on inside the mountain. Kelbor Hal was planning a betrayal. He had made a secret deal with Horus. He wanted the forbidden technology that the Emperor had banned. He thought the Emperor was weak and distracted. Now he was not sure. The energy reading was rising. It was not fluctuating. It was steady. It was controlled. Kelbor Hal sent a code to his fellow conspirators. He told them to freeze. He told them to wait. He needed to calculate the odds of victory. The odds had just dropped. He watched the data streams. The defensive grid of terror was coming online. The guns on the moon were turning. They were not turning toward the dark of space. They were turning toward Mars. Kelbor Hal felt a flicker of an emotion he had deleted long ago. He felt fear. He disconnected his mind from the grid. He ordered his personal guard of battle automata to surround his forge. He decided to wait. If Horus won, he would join him. If the Emperor won, he would claim he was loyal. The machine logic was cold. It was safe. But the doubt remained in his circuits. The Emperor left Dorn and went deeper into the palace. He went to the hall of the Astronomicon. This was a vast mountain peak, hollowed out and filled with machinery. Inside were 10,000 psychers. They were called the Choir. They were people with special mental powers. They sat in rows of metal chairs. Their heads were shaved. Wires went into their skulls. They sang a song with their minds. The song created a beam of light in the warp. This light guided the ships of the Imperium. The Emperor walked down the center aisle. The psychers stopped singing. They could not help it. The presence of the Emperor was too loud in their heads. It drowned out everything else. The master of the Astronomicon ran down the stairs. He was a thin man in heavy robes. He was terrified. He asked the Emperor what was wrong. The Emperor did not stop walking. He climbed the high podium in the center of the hall. He placed his hand on the master control sphere. The sphere was made of black stone. The Emperor closed his eyes. He did not sing. He shouted. He used the 10,000 psychers as a lens. He poured his own power into the machine. The wires in the room began to glow white. The paint on the walls began to peel. The psychers screamed. It was too much power. Their minds began to burn. The Emperor did not stop. He needed to send a message across the galaxy. He needed to send it now. The beam of the Astronomicon changed color. It went from a golden yellow to a blinding white fire. It punched a hole through the warp. It moved faster than time. It swept across the galaxy like a tidal wave. It washed over every ship and every planet. It carried a single thought. The thought was, I know. Far away in the warp, the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet was sailing. It was a massive collection of warships. At the center was the Vengeful Spirit. This was the flagship of the War Master Horus. The ship was the size of a city. It was covered in gargoyles and cannons. Inside the Strategium, Horus Lupercal stood by the main hololith. He was huge. He wore armor the color of sea green. He wore the pelt of a giant wolf across his shoulders. He was looking at the star charts for the Isstvan system. He was planning a murder. He was going to send the loyalist soldiers down to the planet Isstvan III. Then he was going to bomb them with virus bombs. It was a perfect plan. It would get rid of everyone who would not follow him. He was smiling. Then the ship shook. It did not shake a little bit. It shook hard. The artificial gravity failed for a second. Crewmen floated into the air and then crashed down. The lights blew out. Emergency red lights came on. A sound like a tearing metal sheet filled the room. Horus grabbed the hololith table to stay standing. He looked at the navigator's station. The chief navigator was thrashing in his harness. Foam was coming from his mouth. He was screaming about a white fire. Horus felt it too. He felt a pressure in the back of his mind. It felt like a father looking at a son who had broken a rule. It was the Emperor. Horus knew it instantly. The smile vanished from his face. The warp storm outside the ship calmed down instantly. The turbulent waves of the Imperium became flat. The message from Terra had flattened the sea. The fleet was forced out of warp space. They were not at the jump point. They were deep in the Isstvan system. They had arrived early. Horus looked around the dark bridge. His captains were looking at him. Abaddon was there. Little Horus Axiomon was there. They looked worried. They had never seen the War Master look scared. Horus took a breath. He forced his face to be calm. He was a Primarch. He was a demigod. He would not show fear. He asked for a damage report. The tech priest plugged into the wall spoke in binary code. They said the engines were offline. They said the navigation array was fried. They said the fleet was drifting. Horus walked to the reinforced window. He looked out at the stars. They were cold and distant. He saw the other ships of his fleet appearing from the warp. The World Eater's flagship Conqueror appeared. It was covered in blood-red markings. The Death Guard flagship Endurance appeared. It looked sickly and grey. The Emperor's Children flagship Pride of the Emperor appeared. It was purple and gold. They were all there. The trap was assembled, but the element of surprise was gone. The white light had touched them all. Horus knew that his father was awake. He knew that the Emperor was not sitting on the golden throne. The plan had to change. He could not just bomb the planet quietly. He had to act fast. But his ships were dead in the water. They needed hours to restart the engines. This was the delay the Emperor had created. It was a pause in the game. On the lower decks of the Vengeful Spirit, Captain Garviel Loken was cleaning his bolter. He was a member of the Mournival. He was one of Horus's advisors. But he was not part of the betrayal. He did not know about the virus bombs. He felt the ship drop out of the warp. He felt the shockwave. He stood up. His squad room was dark. The emergency lights bathed his armor in red. His brothers looked at him. They were big men. They were space marines. They knew the sound of trouble. Loken put his helmet on. The display came to life. He checked the Vox channel. It was full of static, but through the static he heard a voice. It was not the voice of his captain. It was not the voice of Horus. It was a voice he had only heard once before. It was the Emperor. The voice was faint but clear. It said 3 words: "Trust your brothers." Loken frowned. It was a strange command. Of course he trusted his brothers. He looked at the Marine next to him. It was Nero Vipers. They had fought together for years. But then the voice spoke again. It said, "Not the father. Watch the hands." Loken felt a chill. The message was gone. The static returned. Loken looked at his bolter. He checked the magazine. It was full. He put a second magazine on his belt. He told Vipers to get ready. Vipers asked what was happening. Loken said he did not know. He said the ship felt wrong. He said the air tasted like lies. On the bridge of the Endurance, the Primarch Mortarion stood in silence. He was tall and thin. He wore a rebreather mask over his face. He breathed toxic gas because fresh air hurt him. He held a massive scythe. He felt the Emperor's light too. It burned his skin. He hated psychers. He hated magic. He hated the Emperor for being the biggest psyker of all. He looked at his first captain, Typhon. Typhon was smiling. Typhon liked the warp. Typhon whispered that this was a challenge. Mortarion did not smile. He was a tactician. He knew that if the Emperor could reach them here, then the Emperor could reach them anywhere. The plan relied on speed. It relied on Terror being blind. Terror was not blind. Terror was staring right at them. Mortarion keyed the Vox to speak to Horus. The link was dead. The white light had scrambled short-range communications too. They were isolated. Each ship was alone in the dark. Mortarion gripped his scythe. He looked at the planet Isstvan III below them. It was a brown and green world. It was full of rebels. That was the cover story. They were supposed to go down there and fight. Then the fleet would kill them. Now Mortarion wondered if the fleet would survive long enough to fire the bombs. Back on Terra, the mobilization was chaotic. The Emperor's order had been absolute. Every ship must be seized. In the orbital plates above Earth, millions of people were moving. The Imperial army was taking control of civilian docks. Fights broke out. Dock workers did not want to give up their ships. They did not understand why. The soldiers did not explain. They just used rifle butts and stun batons. Bodies were pushed out of airlocks. They floated in the void like frozen statues. On the high platforms of the orbital defense stations, the macro cannons were being loaded. The shells were the size of buildings. Men used cranes and chains to hoist them into the breaches. The grease on the gears was thick and black. The men were sweating. They were afraid. They had never loaded live ammunition for a defense of Terra. They thought they were safe. The center of the galaxy was supposed to be the safest place. Now the alarms were ringing. The red lights were spinning. The officers were shouting. They were shouting coordinates for firing solutions. The coordinates were for the Mandeville points. These were the places where ships exited the warp. They were aiming at the doors to the solar system. The Emperor stood in the strategium of the Imperial Palace. He was watching the screens. Malcador the Sigillite stood next to him. Malcador looked old and frail. The psychic shout had hurt him too. He was bleeding from his ears. But he did not sit down. He held his staff tight. He looked at the data from the Sol system. He saw the green dots of the Imperial Fist fleet moving into position. He saw the yellow dots of the civilian ships being commandeered. He saw the red dots of the Mechanicus ships near Mars. The Mars ships were not moving. They were holding position. Malkador pointed at them. He asked the Emperor if they should fire on Mars. The Emperor shook his head. He said not yet. He said Kelbor Ahal was a calculator. He would not attack until he was sure he could win. The Emperor had just changed the equation. Kelbor Ahal was recalculating. The Emperor looked at the display for the Isstvan system. It was fuzzy. The distance was too great for sensors, but the Emperor could see it with his mind. He saw the hesitation in Horus. He saw the confusion. That was the weapon. Doubt was the weapon. The Chaos Gods relied on certainty. They relied on the pride of the Primarchs. They relied on the belief that the Emperor was a fool. The Emperor had just shown he was not a fool. He had shown he was a predator. In the warp, the message continued to echo. It hit the other legions too. The word-bearers were far away. Lorgar Aurelian felt the light and he screamed. He fell to the floor of his scriptorium. He was writing a book about the dark gods. The light burned the pages. He knew his father had seen him. He knew his father had seen the demons he was summoning. Lorgar wept. He was not crying for forgiveness. He was crying because he was afraid. He scrambled to his feet. He called for Erebus. He told Erebus to speed up the ritual. They needed the ruin storm. They needed to block the Emperor's sight. If the Emperor could see them, he could stop them. Erebus looked worried. The plan was delicate. Rushing it could cause a disaster. But Lorgar did not care. He shouted. He said the anathema was awake. The anathema was coming. On the Vengeful Spirit, the power began to come back online. The lights flickered and steadied. The gravity stabilized. Horus stood up straight. He looked at his reflection in the dark glass. He saw a king. He saw a god. He pushed the fear down. He was committed. He could not go back. If he went back, he would be executed. He had to go forward. He had to kill his brother. He had to kill his father. He turned to the bridge crew. He gave the order. He told them to prepare for planetary assault. He told them to launch the drop pods. He told them to send the loyalists down. He would stick to the plan. He would purge his legion. He would wash his hands in their blood. He opened a channel to the fleet. The comms were working again. His voice boomed over the speakers. He told his sons that glory awaited them on the surface. He told them the Emperor demanded victory. It was a lie. But his voice was charismatic. It was warm. It made men want to die for him. The drop pods began to load. Thousands of space marines marched into the steel coffins. They checked their weapons. They checked their armor. They did not know they were marching into a grave. Saul Tarvis was a captain of the Emperor's children. He was on the flight deck of the Pride of the Emperor. He was watching the preparations. Something felt wrong to him too. He had seen the way the senior officers were whispering. He had seen the way Eidolon looked at him. Eidolon had a cruel smile. Tarvis decided to do something against protocol. He left his post. He went to the comms tower. He wanted to speak to the surface. He wanted to speak to his friend Lucius. But the lines were busy. The data traffic was encrypted. Tarvis used a code breaker. He was good with tech. He cracked the file. It was a manifest. It was a list of ordnance to be fired. He scrolled down the list. He saw standard bolter rounds. He saw missiles. Then he saw it. Life Eater virus. Extremist grade. The blood drained from his face. He looked at the target coordinates. The coordinates were for the drop zones. They were going to bomb their own men. Tarvitz dropped the data slate. It shattered on the deck. He had to warn them. He had to get to the surface. He ran toward a Thunderhawk gunship. He did not ask for permission. He punched the pilot in the face and threw him out. He jumped into the cockpit. He fired the engines. The clamps were still holding the ship. He forced the thrusters. The clamps tore off. The gunship shot out of the bay. The flight deck officer screamed over the radio. He ordered Tarvitz to return. Tarvitz turned the radio off. He dove toward the planet. He was a small spark of loyalty in a sky full of treason. The Emperor's message had not reached him directly, but the disruption had given him the chance to look, and he had seen the knife in the dark. The first drop pods hit the atmosphere of Isstvan III. They burned like meteors. Inside the pods, the Marines were praying or joking. Garviel Loken sat in the dark. He held his bolter. The voice in his head was gone, but the warning remained. Watch the hands. He looked at the hands of the Marine opposite him. The Marine was nervous. His hands were shaking. Loken realized that fear was the contagion. The Emperor was not there to save them. The Emperor was there to tell them to save themselves. The pod slammed into the ruins of the Coral City. Dust rose up in clouds. The doors blasted open. The Space Marines charged out. They began to shoot the rebels. The rebels were weak humans. They died easily. It was a massacre. But Loken did not celebrate. He watched the sky. He waited for the betrayal. He did not know what form it would take, but he knew it was coming from above. Back on Terra, the Emperor turned away from the screen. He had done what he could for the distant legions. He had sown the seed of doubt. He had given the loyal ones a chance to see the truth. Now he had to focus on the immediate threat. He looked at Valdor. He told Valdor to open the vaults of Rhythen. Valdor's eyes widened. The vaults of Rhythen held weapons from the dark age of technology. They were weapons that ate reality. They were weapons that drank souls. The Emperor had forbidden their use. He had said they were too dangerous for mankind. Valdor asked if the situation was that desperate. The Emperor nodded. He said the war would not be fought with honor. It would be fought with extinction. He told Valdor to arm the Custodes with the Adrathic Destructors. He told him to wake the side titans of the Ordo Sinister. The Ordo Sinister were giant war machines fueled by the pain of psychers. They were nightmares made of metal. The Emperor was taking the gloves off. He was not playing the role of the benevolent father anymore. He was the warlord of terror. He was the man who had conquered old Earth with thunder and lightning. He was preparing to do it again. The timeline had shifted. The gentle path was gone. The only path left was the one paved with ash. The first day of the new war had ended. The night was coming, and in the dark the monsters were waiting. But the Emperor was the biggest monster of them all. The air over the Coral City on Isstvan III was filled with grey smoke. The battle against the rebels was over. It had been a short war. The Space Marines of 4 legions had crushed the local humans with ease. Garviel Loken stood in the wreckage of a large plaza. He looked at the bodies of the rebels. They looked small and broken. He did not feel proud. He felt the cold knot in his stomach growing tighter. The static in his helmet clicked. It was a new signal. It was not on the command frequency. It was a wide broadcast on a low power channel. It was Saul Tarvitz. The voice was breathless. Tarvitz was shouting. He said the word betrayal. He said the fleet was opening fire. Loken looked up. The clouds above were thick. He could not see the ships, but he could see the streaks of fire coming down. They were not drop pods. They were black cylinders. They were virus bombs. Loken did not hesitate. He did not ask for confirmation. The Emperor's warning about the hands flashed in his mind. He grabbed Nero Vipus by the shoulder plate. He shouted the order to run. He pointed to the bunkers. The Coral City was built on top of old catacombs. There were sealed vaults beneath the plaza. Loken switched his Vox to the squad channel. He screamed at his men to get underground. He did not say why. There was no time to explain that their father was trying to kill them. The virus bombs burst high in the air. They did not explode with fire. They exploded with a wet, coughing sound. A dark green mist rained down on the city. It fell on the statues and the buildings. It fell on the rebels who were still alive. It fell on the space marines who were too slow. The Life-Eater virus was a masterpiece of science. It did not care about armor. It did not care about faith. It found the seals in the power armor. It ate through the rubber gaskets. It touched the skin. A space marine is hard to kill. He has 2 hearts. He has blood that clots instantly. But the virus turned the blood into sludge. It turned the muscles into jelly. Loken dragged the wounded marine into the bunker. He slammed the heavy blast door shut. He spun the locking wheel. He heard the screaming start outside. It was a sound that no human throat should make. It was the sound of thousands of people dissolving at the same time. Inside the bunker, the air was stale and cold. The lights flickered. Loken looked at the faces of his men. They were the sons of Horus. They were the elite. Now they were huddled in the dark like frightened children. They listened to the death of a world. Up in orbit, Horus watched the destruction. He stood on the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit. He held a glass of wine. He did not drink it. He watched the tactical display. The green mist was covering the planet. The biological life signs were dropping to 0. Millions of red lights turned black. It was genocide. It was efficient. But Horus was not smiling. The Emperor's psychic shout from still echoed in the room. The hesitation it caused had a price. The bombing run had been rushed. The targeting was not perfect. The sensors showed that many of the loyalist squads had moved toward the bunkers before the bombs hit. They had been warned. Horus looked at the comms officer. He asked who had sent the warning. The officer said it was a Thunderhawk gunship from the Emperor's Children fleet. Horus crushed the wine glass in his hand. The glass shards cut his glove. He did not bleed. He was too angry to bleed. He realized that the clean murder was gone. He had missed. There were survivors. On the surface, the second phase began. The virus had eaten everything organic. It had released massive amounts of gas. The atmosphere of Isstvan III was now flammable. The Vengeful Spirit fired a single lance beam. It was a spear of pure energy. It hit the clouds. The sky caught fire. It was a global firestorm. The fire burned hotter than a plasma reactor. It scoured the surface of the planet. It turned the stone into glass. It turned the bones into ash. Inside the bunker, the heat was unbearable. The walls became hot to the touch. The air filters groaned. Loken sat on the floor. He took his helmet off. He looked at Tarvitz. Tarvitz had made it to their position. He was covered in soot. He looked broken. Loken asked him why. Tarvitz told him about the manifest. He told him about the plan to purge the legions. Loken listened. He felt something break inside his chest. It was his loyalty. It was his love for his father. It shattered like a dropped plate. He stood up. He put his helmet back on. The fire outside was dying down. The oxygen was gone. The flames could not burn without air. Loken checked his bolter. He said they were not dead yet. He said if Horus wanted them dead, he would have to come down and do it himself. In the flagship of the World Eaters, the Primarch Angron was pacing. He was a giant of muscle and rage. Metal cables were drilled into his skull. They were called the Butcher's Nails. They made him feel pain when he was not killing. He watched the firestorm on the screen. He saw the heat signatures of the survivors in the ruins. He started to laugh. It was a growl of a laugh. He did not want to bomb them. He wanted to fight them. He wanted to cut them with his axes. He keyed the Vox. He did not ask Horus for permission. He roared at his captain to prepare the drop. Khan the betrayer looked at him. Khan said the orders were to wait. Angron punched Khan in the chest. It cracked the ceramite armor. Angron yelled that he was the Red Angel. He did not wait. He jumped into a drop pod. He launched himself. The rest of the World Eaters saw their father launch. They did not wait either. They ran to the pods. It was a chain reaction of rage. 50 drop pods shot out to the Conqueror. They fell toward the burning planet. Horus saw the World Eaters launch. He cursed. He slammed his fist on the tactical table. The plan was falling apart. He could not bomb the planet again with Angron down there. He had to send troops to support him. He had to turn this into a ground war. This was exactly what he did not want. A ground war took time. Time was the one thing the Emperor had taken away from him. Horus looked at Mortarion. He looked at Fulgrim. He told them to deploy. He told them to go down and finish the job. The betrayal at Isstvan III had turned from an execution into a civil war. The galaxy was now at war with itself. While the fire burned on Isstvan, the real catastrophe struck the Sol system. The Emperor knew that Mars was the key. If Mars turned traitor, Terra would be cut off from supplies. He had sent a message to the fabricator General Kelbor Hal, but he did not wait for a reply. The Emperor signaled the Kane. Zagthian Kane was the fabricator locum. He was the second in command on Mars. He was loyal. The Emperor told Kane that Kelbor Hal was a traitor. He told Kane to purge the High Priesthood. This message was intercepted by Kelbor Hal. The fabricator general sat in his forge at Olympus Mons. He realized he had no more time to calculate. The Emperor had made the first move. Kelbor Hal decided to burn the board. He opened the vaults of Moraveg. These were forbidden data archives buried deep in the Red Planet. They contained the scrap code. This was a logic virus created by the warp. It was a digital plague. Kelbor Hal uploaded the virus into the noosphere. The noosphere was the wireless network that connected every machine on Mars. The effect was instant and horrific. The scrap code screamed through the data lines. It hit the traffic control systems first. Thousands of heavy cargo lifters over Mars lost their guidance. They crashed into the iron cities below. It rained burning metal. Then the virus hit the Skitarii legions. The loyalist soldiers had their cybernetic brains rewritten. They turned their guns on each other. The forges exploded. Reactors went critical. The beautiful order of the Mechanicus collapsed into anarchy. Kane was in his forge when the code hit. He saw his servitors start to claw at their own faces. He saw the lights turn a sick purple color. He cut the hardline connection to the main grid. He saved his own mind. But he saw the tactical map of Mars turn red. The traitor forges were attacking. The Titan legions were waking up. The god machines were confused. Their machine spirits were being tortured by the virus. Some Titans went mad and started firing plasma cannons into the civilian hab blocks. Millions of tech thralls died in minutes. The atmosphere of Mars turned black with oil smoke. The schism of Mars had begun. It was not a slow political divide. It was a sudden knife fight in a dark room. The production of weapons for the Imperium stopped instantly. Terra was alone. The Emperor stood on the walls of the palace. He looked up at the night sky. He could see the red dot of Mars. It was flickering. He knew what was happening. He felt the death of the machine spirits. Malkador stood beside him. Malkador was shaking. The psychic backlash from Mars was heavy. Malkador said they had lost the weapon forges. He said the ammunition supply would run out in months. The Emperor did not blink. He said they would fight with spears if they had to. He turned to Rogal Dorn. Dorn had just arrived from the orbital docks. Dorn looked pale. He had heard the reports from Mars. He asked the Emperor if he should send the Imperial Fist to retake the Red Planet. The Emperor said no. He said Mars was a trap. If they sent the fleet to Mars, the traitors would jump into the Sol system behind them. They had to blockade Mars. They had to quarantine the sickness. Dorn nodded. He understood the logic of a siege. He gave the order to the phalanx. The phalanx was a star fort the size of a moon. He ordered it to park between Terra and Mars. He ordered it to target anything that tried to leave the Red Planet. This was the first strategic loss. The Imperium had lost its armory. The Emperor looked at the custodian guard. He told them to prepare the dungeons. He was going to have to work faster on his secret project. The Webway project was the only way out. If he could finish the human webway, they could travel without ships. They would not need the warp. But the gate was unstable. The psychic pressure was cracking the seals. The Emperor had to sit on the golden throne to hold it shut. He could not lead the armies. He was trapped. This was the tragedy of his waking. He was awake, but he was paralyzed by the need to hold the door closed. Back on Isstvan III, the ground war was brutal. The loyalists had dug into the ruins. They had nothing to lose. They knew there were dead men walking. Loken led a counterattack against the World Eater squad. The World Eaters were berserkers. They charged with chain axes revving. Loken and his men used discipline. They set up overlapping fields of fire. They cut the traitors down. Loken saw a World Eater on the ground. The Marine was missing his legs, but he was still trying to crawl forward to bite Loken's ankle. Loken shot him in the head. He looked at the dead traitor's armor. It was white and blue. It was the colors of the legion he had fought beside for decades. Loken felt a deep sadness. He realized the galaxy had gone mad. Then the sky darkened again. This time, it was not bombs. It was titans. The Dies Irae was a warmonger-class titan of the Legio Mortis. It was a walking city. It landed with a seismic crash that knocked Marines off their feet. Its horn blew a sound that shattered windows for miles. It was loyal to Horus. It began to walk through the ruins. It crushed bunkers under its feet. It fired plasma annihilators that turned entire city blocks into craters. The Loyalists had no heavy weapons to fight it. They had small arms and courage. Courage does not stop a plasma bolt. Loken ordered a retreat. They fell back deeper into the catacombs. They were being hunted like rats. In the warp, Lorgar Aurelian was moving his fleet. The word-bearers had finished their dark ritual. The ruin storm was growing. It was a massive wall of psychic turbulence that cut the galaxy in half. It made warp travel impossible for Loyalist ships. It blinded the Astronomicon. On Terra, the light of the beacon flickered. The Emperor on the throne gritted his teeth. He felt the shadow fall across the galaxy. The Ultramarines were cut off in the east. The Dark Angels were lost in the north. The Space Wolves were scattered. The Imperium was broken into pieces. The Emperor was alone in the dark. The catastrophe was complete. The legions were shattered. Mars was burning. The warp was a storm. And on the radio waves of the Sol system, a new voice appeared. It was the voice of Kelbor Hal. He declared that the Emperor was the Omnissiah no longer. He declared that there was a new master of machines. He called him the War Master. The broadcast played on every Vox set on Terra. It played in the Hab blocks. It played in the barracks. People panicked. Riots broke out in the hives. Food riots, water riots. The fear of the dark took over. The Adeptus Arbeit went out with shotguns and shields. They beat the crowds back. Blood ran in the gutters of the throne world. The golden dream was dead. The reality of iron and rust had arrived. The Emperor sat on the golden throne. The machinery hummed. He closed his eyes. He projected his mind into the warp. He tried to find the soul of his son Magnus. Magnus the Red was the only one who could help him sit on the throne. If Magnus took the seat, the Emperor could fight. But Magnus was far away on Prospero, and the Emperor knew that Leman Russ, the Wolf King, was hunting him. The orders had been sent before the Emperor woke up. The orders were to censure Magnus, but Horus had changed the orders. Horus had told Russ to kill Magnus. The Emperor tried to reach Russ. He tried to send a message to stop, but the ruin storm was too thick. The message bounced back. The Emperor watched in his mind as the Space Wolves fleet approached Prospero. He saw another tragedy about to happen. He could not stop it. He was powerful, but he was not omnipotent. He had to choose, save Magnus or save Terra. He chose Terra. He withdrew his mind. He let the wolf hunt the Cyclops. It was a cold calculation. It was the math of survival. On Isstvan III, the night fell. The fire still burned. Loken sat in the dark. He was cleaning his bolter again. It was a ritual to keep him sane. Tarvitz sat next to him. Tarvitz was looking at a data slate. He was counting the survivors. There were 5,000 loyalists left. 5,000 against 4 legions. It was impossible. But Tarvitz smiled. It was a grim smile. He said that every day they survived was a day Horus could not move toward Terra. They were the anchor dragging on the traitor fleet. They were buying time for the Emperor. Loken nodded. He understood. They were not fighting to win. They were fighting to die slowly. It was a soldier's job. He put the magazine back in his weapon. He stood up. He told Tarvitz to get some sleep. He would take the first watch. He walked to the edge of the ruin. He looked up at the stars. They looked different now. They looked colder. He wondered if the Emperor was looking back. He did not know, but he stood his ground. He was a space marine, and he would know no fear. The act of dying had begun. The act of living was the resistance. The tragedy was written in blood on the black sand of Isstvan. The frigate Eisenstein broke into the Sol system. It did not arrive gracefully. Its engines were bleeding plasma. Its hull was scorched by warp fire. It was running from the betrayal at Isstvan III. Captain Nathaniel Garrow stood on the bridge. He was a battle captain of the Death Guard. He was loyal. He had a message for the Emperor. He thought he was bringing news that would save the Imperium. He thought he was the first to know about Horus. He ordered his Vox officer to broadcast the emergency codes. He expected surprise. He expected confusion. He did not expect to be targeted. The defensive sensors of the Sol system locked onto his ship instantly. 12 fire control radars painted the Eisenstein. On the tactical plot, Garrow saw the massive yellow icon of the Phalanx. The Starfort was moving to intercept. It was not welcoming. It was hunting. Garrow shouted into the comms. He identified himself. He shouted that he was loyal. A voice cut through the static. It was Rogal Dorn. The voice was cold. Dorn did not ask what happened. Dorn ordered Garrow to power down his shields and prepare to be boarded. Garrow was confused. He obeyed. He let the Imperial fists board his ship. When Dorn walked onto the bridge of the Eisenstein, he did not look shocked by Garrow's story. He listened to the report of the virus bombs. He listened to the death of the loyalists. He nodded grimly. He told Garrow that the Emperor already knew. Garrow felt a hollowness in his chest. His desperate run had not been a warning. It had just been a flight from the grave. The Emperor knew, and because the Emperor knew, the response was already in motion. But knowledge is not the same as safety. The arrival of the Eisenstein brought one crucial thing. It brought the specific frequency of the virus bomb signals. Dorn took this data. He sent it to the Mechanicus forces that were still loyal on Earth. He ordered them to build jammers. If Horus tried to use the Life Eater virus on Terra, they would be ready. This was a small victory. But the war was shifting. The scale was expanding. In the orbital shipyards of Luna, the Retribution fleet was gathering. This was the Emperor's hammer. It consisted of 3 full legions: the Iron Hands, the Salamanders, and the Raven Guard. They were the strongest legions. They were the most stable. Pharos Manus, the Primarch of the Iron Hands, was in command. He was a giant with hands of living metal. He was furious. He paced the deck of his flagship, the Ferrum. He had received the Emperor's orders. The orders were clear. Go to Isstvan IV. Blockade the system. Do not engage on the ground. Wait for the traitor fleets to run out of supplies. The Emperor wanted a siege. He wanted to starve Horus out. He knew that Horus was rushing. He knew the traitors were desperate. A siege would break them. But Pharos Manus was not a man of patience. He was a man of iron. He looked at the reports from Isstvan III. He saw that his brother Fulgrim was there. Fulgrim had betrayed him. They had been best friends. They had forged weapons together. Now Fulgrim was a traitor. The anger in Pharos' heart was hotter than a furnace. He looked at Vulcan and Corax. They were on the hololith. Vulcan agreed with the Emperor's plan. He said they should save lives. Corax agreed. He said they should use stealth and patience. Pharos slammed his metal fist on the table. He said the Emperor was sitting on a throne while the galaxy burned. He said the Emperor did not understand the insult. Pharos shouted that he would not wait. He cut the link. He ordered his fleet to warp. He did not wait for the others to form up. He charged ahead. He broke the formation. This was the first crack in the loyalist wall. The Emperor had given a perfect order. But a Primarch's pride is a flaw in the design. The chain reaction had begun. While the fleet moved to Isstvan, a tragedy unfolded on Prospero. The Space Wolves had arrived. Leman Russ was the executioner. He had been told by Horus that the Emperor wanted Magnus dead. The Emperor had tried to stop this, but the message failed. Now the wolves descended. The city of Tisca was a jewel of glass and gold. The Space Wolves bombed it from orbit. Then they landed. It was a slaughter. The Thousand Sons were scholars. They were powerful psychers, but they were not warriors like the wolves. They died screaming. Magnus the Red sat in his tower. He saw the Wolf King coming. Magnus had seen the future too. He knew that he had been manipulated. He knew that if he fought back, he would destroy the planet. So he lowered the shields. He accepted his death. He thought it would save his sons. It did not. The wolves killed everyone. They burned the libraries. They broke the statues. Then the inflection point hit. In the chaos of the burning city, Magnus changed his mind. He saw his sons dying. He saw the knowledge of mankind being erased. He looked at the sky and saw the eye of Tzeentch opening. The Chaos God offered him a way out. It offered him life. Magnus was weak with grief. He accepted. He cast a spell that shattered reality. He transported the City of Light into the warp. But the spell had a cost. The psychic backlash slammed into terror. The Emperor was sitting on the golden throne. He was holding the webway gate shut against the demons. The scream of Magnus hit him like a physical blow. The Emperor gasped. Blood poured from his nose. The golden armor on his chest cracked. The machinery of the throne sparked and smoked. The link was broken. For 1 second, the gate opened. Demons flooded into the Imperial dungeon. The custodian guard were ready. They formed a shield wall at the foot of the throne. They fought with spears and swords. It was a battle in hell. The Emperor had to use all his power to seal the breach again. He succeeded, but the cost was terrible. He was now locked to the throne. He could not speak. He could not issue orders. He could not move. He was a living battery for the gate. The master of mankind was silenced. The Imperium was decapitated. Malkador was left alone to run the war. He looked at the Emperor's frozen form. He saw the pain on his master's face. He knew that the plan to use the webway was dead. The dream was dead. Now, it was just a fight for survival. Malkador tried to send a message to the Retribution fleet. He tried to tell Pharos Manus to come back. He tried to tell them that the Emperor was incapacitated, but the ruin storm blocked the signal. The fleet was already at Isstvan V. They arrived in the system. The planet was a black rock. The traitor legions were dug in. The Emperor's children, the World Eaters, the Death Guard, and the Sons of Horus, they were waiting. Pharos Manus saw the enemy fleet. He did not slow down. He did not wait for Vulcan and Corax to catch up. He drove the Iron Hands straight at the planet. He launched drop pods. He wandered Fulgrim. He landed in the Urgal Depression. It was a massive natural amphitheater. The traitors were on the high ground. The Iron Hands charged up the slopes. It was a meat grinder. Tanks exploded. Men died by the thousands. Pharos fought like a madman. He smashed through the lines. He found Fulgrim. They fought. Thunder hammer against silver sword. It was a duel of gods. Then the second wave arrived. The Night Lords, the Iron Warriors, the Alpha Legion, and the Word Bearers. In the original timeline, these legions pretended to be loyal and then shot the loyalists in the back. But in this timeline, the Emperor had warned everyone. Trust no one. Vulcan and Corax were arriving late because Pharos had rushed. They saw the second wave ships appearing. They did not hail them. They scanned them. Corax was paranoid. He saw that the Night Lords had their weapons charged. He saw that the Iron Warriors were targeting the Salamander's engines. Corax shouted a warning. The surprise was lost. The second wave could not shoot them in the back easily. The battle in space exploded. It was 7 traitor legions against 2 loyalist legions in orbit. The Night Lords swarmed the Raven Guard ships. The Alpha Legion used electronic warfare to blind the Salamanders. On the ground, Pharos was alone. He was cut off. The Iron Hands were surrounded by 4 traitor legions. There were no reinforcements coming. The second wave was fighting in the sky. Pharos realized his mistake. He had let his anger drive him. He looked at Fulgrim. Fulgrim was laughing. Fulgrim's sword was possessed by a demon. It moved faster than light. It cut Pharos's head off. The Primarch of the Iron Hands fell. He was the first son to die. The Iron Hands went mad with grief. They were slaughtered. They died to a man in the black sand. In orbit, the disaster was different, but just as bad. The Raven Guard and Salamanders were being picked apart. They were outnumbered 3-1. Corax realized they could not win. He ordered a retreat. He ordered his ships to emergency jump. They did not calculate coordinates. They just jumped to escape. Many ships were lost in the warp. Others were torn apart by the traitor guns. Vulcan tried to stay. He wanted to recover Pharos's body, but his captains dragged him away. The Salamander's flagship, the Flame-wrought, took heavy damage. It limped away into the dark. The Isstvan V campaign was a catastrophe. 1 legion was dead. 2 were broken. The path to Terra was wide open. Back on Terra, the effects of the blockade were starting to bite. The strategic chain reaction had reached the common people. Food rations were cut in half. The water recycling plants were failing because they lacked spare parts from Mars. The people of the Hive cities were hungry. They were tired. They worked 18-hour shifts in the munition factories. They made bullets for a war they did not understand. In the queue for algae paste, a man fell down. He was dead from exhaustion. The people around him did not stop. They stepped over his body. They needed to eat. The corpse guilds would come later. This was the new reality. Life was fuel. Dorn stood on the walls of the palace. He looked at the data slate. He saw the report from Isstvan. It was fragmentary. It confirmed the death of Pharos. It confirmed the routing of the fleet. Dorn did not cry. He did not shout. He felt the weight of the walls pressing down on him. He was the Praetorian. He was the shield. And now He was the only thing left. The Emperor was silent on the throne. The other legions were scattered or dead. The wolf was far away. The angel, Sanguinius, was lost in the Cygnus cluster fighting demons. The lion was hunting in the north. Dorn realized that the traitors would come for Terra next. He looked at the vast orbital plates. He made a decision. He ordered the Beta Garman defensive line to be fortified. The Beta Garman cluster was the gateway to the Sol system. If he could hold them there, he could buy time. He needed time to fix the phalanx. He needed time to train new soldiers. He ordered the conscription of 10 million civilians. They were taken from their homes. They were given laser rifles and flak armor. They were loaded onto transport ships. They were not soldiers. They were teachers, farmers, clerks. They were crying. They were sent to Beta Garman to die. Dorn watched the ships leave. He knew he was sending them to the slaughter. But he had no choice. This was the math of the Emperor. One life is nothing. Survival is everything. On Mars, the situation worsened. The blockade was holding, but the traitors were digging deep. They were mining the core of the planet. They were building something. The sensors on the phalanx picked up strange energy signatures. It was warp energy. The dark mechanicum was summoning demons into the machines. The logic of the machine god was being corrupted. Tanks were starting to grow teeth. Guns were starting to bleed. The horror of the warp was merging with the science of man. This was the scrap code evolving. It was becoming a physical virus. Horus moved his fleet away from Isstvan. He was flush with victory. He had killed a brother. He had broken 3 legions. He felt invincible. He gathered his war council. He looked at Lova. He looked at Angron. He looked at Mortarion. He told them the road to Terra was paved with bones. He told them to prepare for the final push. But he also felt a sickness in his soul. The wound he had taken from the Emperor's psychic shout had not healed. It was a cold spot in his mind. It whispered to him. It told him he was running out of time. It told him the Emperor was building something new. Horus ordered the fleet to move to Molech. Molech was a world where the Emperor had gained his power long ago. Horus wanted that power. He wanted to be a god. He needed to be a god to kill his father. The Emperor sat on the throne. His eyes were closed. His skin was grey. He was skeletal. The golden armor hung loosely on his frame. He was dying. The effort of holding the warp gate was consuming his soul. Malkador stood at the base of the throne. He was weeping. He whispered to the Emperor. He asked if there was any hope. The Emperor did not answer. But in the mind of Malkador, a single image appeared. It was a sword burning with fire, and a name, Guilliman, Robut. Guilliman was far away in Ultramar. He was the statesman. He was the empire builder. The Emperor had not called for the lion. He had not called for the wolf. He had called for the bureaucrat. The message was sent. It was a faint psychic spark. It had to cross the ruin storm. It was a desperate gamble. The warrior king was gone. The administrator was needed. The galaxy was broken. Only someone who knew how to build a state could save it. The strategic chain reaction had destroyed the old Imperium. The war for the new Imperium had begun. The planet Sotha was a meaningless rock on the edge of the 500 worlds of Ultramar. It was quiet. It was agricultural. It was the last place anyone expected the fate of the galaxy to turn. Buried inside the struggle of Mount Pharos was a device of Xenos origin. It was older than humanity. It was older than the Elder. It was a machine built by the Necrons in the dawn of time. It relied on empathy and pain to function. Guarding this machine was a small company of soldiers who should have been enemies. There was Alexis Pollux of the Imperial Fists. He was a giant of a man even for a space marine. He had been stranded there by the warp storms. And there was Barabbas Dantioch. Dantioch was a warsmith of the Iron Warriors. He wore an iron mask that was permanently fused to his skull. He was a cripple. He had aged prematurely due to Hrud entropy fields. He was loyal to the Emperor, but his legion was not. He was an outcast. Dantioch sat in the control interface of the Pharos. The machine spoke to him in pulses of green light. It whispered to his nervous system. Outside the mountain, the galaxy was screaming. The ruin storm that Lorgar had summoned was a wall of psychic noise. It blocked all communication. It blinded the Astronomicon. The Ultramarines were trapped in their own kingdom. They did not know if Terra had fallen. They did not know if the Emperor was alive. They were preparing to build a new empire, Imperium Secundus, because they believed the old one was dead. But Dantioch had received a ghost of a signal. It was the psychic spark the Emperor had sent. It was faint. It was dying. It was a single frequency repeating a coordinate. Dantioch looked at Pollux. He told the Imperial Fist that he could amplify the signal. He could use the Pharos to catch the spark and turn it into a fire. He could blast a hole through the ruin storm. But the calculation was dangerous. The Pharos was not an antenna. It was a quantum tunneler. To power it up to that level required a biological interface of immense strength. It required a sacrifice. Pollux argued against it. He said it was suicide. He said they should wait for Guilliman to arrive. Dantioch shook his head. He said there was no time. The signal was fading. If they lost it now, the connection to Terra would be severed forever. The loyalists would remain divided. Horus would pick them off one by one. Dantioch made the choice. It was a small choice in a dark room. He did not ask for permission from a Primarch. He did not convene a council of war. He simply plugged his mechatendrils into the socket. He opened his mind to the machine. He fed his own life force into the reactor. The Pharos hummed. The mountains shook. A beam of coherent empathetic energy shot up from the surface of Sotha. It did not go into the warp. It bypassed the warp. It pierced the veil of reality. It hit the ruin storm like a bullet hitting glass. For 10 seconds the galaxy was illuminated. The psychic clouds were blown apart. In the Cygnus cluster, Sanguinius was fighting a greater demon named Kabanda. The blood angels were dying of the red thirst. They were lost in madness. Then Sanguinius saw the light. It was a star that should not be there. It cut through the red fog of the system. It gave him a reference point. He grabbed the diamond by the throat. He broke its back across his knee. He threw the carcass down. He ordered his fleet to align with the light. He knew instantly it was a path. In the Thramas Crusade, the lion was hunting the Night Lords. It was a game of cat and mouse in the dark. Conrad Curzay was winning because he owned the shadows. Then the light of Sotha flashed. The lion stood on the bridge of the invincible reason. He saw the vector. He saw the path to Ultramar. He saw the path to his brothers. He did not hesitate. He ordered the Dark Angels to break engagement. They turned their engines to maximum. They rode the wake of the Pharos beam. On Macragga, Robert Guilliman was sitting at his desk. He was writing a constitution for the new empire. He was ready to give up on Terra. The light of the Pharos flooded his room. It washed over his papers. He stood up. The sensors screamed. The signal from the Emperor came through clearly for the first time. It was not just a name. It was a command. Hold. The message was simple. The Emperor was alive. Terra still stood. The justification for Imperium Secundus evaporated in a single second. Guilliman dropped his pen. He grabbed his bolter. The theoretical was over. The practical had begun. He ordered the muster of the 500 worlds. The massive outcome of Dantiok's choice was the unification of the three strongest loyalist legions. They were no longer lost. They were converging on Sotha. But the light cast a shadow. The Pharos was a beacon. It shone in the physical universe, but it also shone in the deep void. Far beyond the galactic rim, in the cold dark between galaxies, something was sleeping. It was a hunger as old as the stars. It had been drifting for eons. The light of the Pharos hit its sensory organs. It tasted the energy. It tasted the biomass. The great devourer woke up. The Tyranid hive fleet changed course. They had been drifting aimlessly. Now they had a target. Dantiok had saved the Imperium of the present, but he had doomed the Imperium of the future. The Tyranids were coming, and they would arrive centuries earlier than they were supposed to. The immediate consequence was closer to home. Conrad Kurza saw the light too. The Night Haunter was a creature of darkness. The light burned him. He knew where it came from. He knew that Sotha was the key. He ordered the Night Lord's fleet to ignore the lion. He ordered them to jump to Sotha. He wanted to destroy the lighthouse. He wanted to put the galaxy back in the dark. The Night Lords arrived at Sotha within hours. The battle for the mountain began. It was not a battle of tactics. It was a battle of horror. The Night Lords flayed the skin from the human defenders. They dropped the bodies from the sky. Pollux and his Imperial fists held the gates. They fought with shields and hammers. They built walls of dead bodies. Dantiok stayed in the chair. He was dying. The machine was eating his nervous system. But he refused to disconnect. He had to keep the beacon lit until the Primarchs arrived. While the Eastern Galaxy erupted into a race for Sotha, the war in the Sol system shifted gears. The Emperor was still trapped on the throne. The failure of the Webway project was a secret known only to a few. But the resources required to keep the gate shut were growing. The Emperor needed psychers. He needed souls. The unspoken sanction began. The black ships were rerouted. Instead of taking untrained psychers to school, they brought them to the Imperial dungeon. Thousands of frightened men and women were marched into the throne room. They were strapped into coffins connected to the machinery. Their life force was drained to power the Golden Throne. It was a daily holocaust. In the shadows of the palace, a second small choice was made. Malcador the Sigillite was running out of options. He needed to know what Horus was doing. He needed a spy who could get close to a Primarch. He looked at his roster of knights-errant. These were space marines who had abandoned their legions to serve the Emperor directly. He chose Nathaniel Garrow. He gave Garrow a mission that seemed impossible. He told Garrow to infiltrate the Vengeful Spirit. He told him to find the location of the main traitor muster. Garrow asked how he was supposed to get on board the enemy flagship. Malcador gave him a device. It was a small stealth field generator from the Dark Age. It was unstable. It would poison the user with radiation. Garrow took it. He accepted the death sentence. Horus was at Moloch. He had conquered the planet. He had found the gate to the warp that the Emperor had used millennia ago. He walked into the gate. He spent what felt like eternity in the realm of the Chaos Gods. He fought their champions. He won their favor. He aged 1,000 years in a single moment. When he stepped back out of the gate, he was no longer just a Primarch. He was the vessel of the Pantheon. He was swollen with power. He was a god in flesh. But as he emerged, he felt the change in the warp. He felt the breach that Dantiok had created. He felt the convergence of his brothers. Horus realized he had made a mistake. He had spent too much time playing with logistics. He had spent too much time conquering worlds to build supply lines. He thought he had years. He thought the ruin storm would keep the loyalists away forever. But the light of Sotha had ruined his schedule. Sanguinius, the Lion, and Guilliman were coming. If they linked up, they would crush him. He could not fight 3 legions and the Emperor at the same time. He had to move. He had to strike the head of the snake before the body coiled around him. Horus ordered the fleet to abandon the Molech campaign. He ordered them to ignore the remaining loyalist strongholds at Beta Garman. He ordered a direct jump to the Sol system. This was a massive gamble. To jump directly to Terra requires calculating the warp currents perfectly. Usually, a fleet must stop at Beta Garman to restabilize. Skipping Beta Garman meant risking the loss of half the fleet in the warp. It was a desperate move. It was the move of a gambler who knows the house is winning. Abaddon argued against it. He said the fleet would be scattered. He said they would arrive at Terra piecemeal. Horus did not listen. His eyes were burning with the fire of the 4 gods. He said that chaos was their ally. He said the warp would carry them. He sacrificed 1 million slaves on the decks of the Vengeful Spirit to grease the wheels of reality. The blood flowed into the bilges. The demons laughed. The traitor fleet vanished into the Imperium. They were bypassing the war. They were going straight for the throat. Back on Sotha, the end was near. The Night Lords had breached the inner sanctum. Pollux was fighting Conrad Kurze. It was not a fight. It was an execution. Kurz moved like liquid shadow. He cut Pollux's shield arm off. He kicked the giant imperial fist into the wall. He raised his lightning claws to finish him. Then the ceiling exploded. A drop pod smashed through the rock. It was gold and blue. It was the Ultramarines. Guilliman had arrived. He did not come with an army. He came with his honor guard. He charged Kurze. The 2 brothers collided. It was discipline against insanity. Then the sky broke open again. A storm of red wings descended. Sanguinius dropped from the heavens. He did not use a drop pod. He flew. He crashed into the Night Lord's lines. He was a whirlwind of death. The Lion arrived moments later, teleporting directly from orbit with his Deathwing Terminators. The Triumvirate was assembled. Kurz saw the odds. He was crazy, but he was not stupid. He detonated a satchel charge of melter bombs. The explosion collapsed the chamber. In the dust and confusion, Kurz escaped. He fled into the night. The 3 loyalist Primarchs stood over the chair of the Pharos. Dantioch was dead. He had burned out. His body was a husk of ash inside the armor. But the light had done its work. The path to Terra was clear. Guilliman looked at his brothers. He saw the rage in the Lion's eyes. He saw the sadness in Sanguinius's face. He told them the plan. He said they would not build an empire here. They would take every ship they had. They would ride the tailwind of the Pharos beam all the way to Terra. They would break the siege before it began. But they were too late to stop the arrival. In the Sol system, the alarms began to scream. They did not scream for a fleet arriving at the Mandeville points at the edge of the system. They screamed for a fleet arriving inside the orbit of Pluto. Horus had done the impossible. He had ridden the warp rift directly into the solar system. Ships materialized inside the defensive grid. Some merged with asteroids. Some merged with each other. It was a horrific arrival. But thousands of ships survived. The traitor fleet was in the heart of the home system. Rogal Dorn watched the tactical plot from the Barb Bastion. He saw the red icons appearing everywhere. They were bypassing the rings of iron. They were bypassing the phalanx. They were already dropping troops on Luna. They were dropping troops on the spaceports of Terra. The siege of Terra had not begun with a bombardment. It had begun with an invasion. The time for preparation was over. The time for wars was over. Dawn opened a channel to the Emperor. He knew his father could not speak, but he needed him to hear. He said, "They are here." The emperor on the throne heard him. A single tear of golden blood rolled down the emperor's cheek. He knew what was coming. He knew that Horus had to be stopped physically. The psychic battle was a stalemate. The physical battle was the only way to end it. The emperor began to gather his remaining strength. He began to pull the power back from the Astronomicon. He began to darken the galaxy to light the fire in his sword. On the Vengeful Spirit, Horus stood on the bridge. He looked at the blue marble of terror. He saw the lights of the hive cities. He felt the presence of his father. He whispered to the gods. He told them to watch. He told them he would burn the world to save it. He gave the order. Let the galaxy burn. The orbital bombardment began. It was not aimed at military targets. It was aimed at the population. It was aimed at the spirit of humanity. The war of the demigods had reached its final stage. The small choice of a warsmith on a distant rock had accelerated the clock. The slow death was gone. The quick death had arrived. The stage was the throne room, and the actors were ready to die. The sky of terror was not black. It was the color of a bruise. The traitor fleet had materialized inside the commercial shipping lanes. They had displaced matter. Thousands of civilian cargo haulers had been fused with the hulls of the warships. They exploded instantly. The debris field created a ring of fire around the planet. It was a shroud of burning metal. The Vengeful Spirit sat in the center of the devastation. It was immense. It was no longer a machine of imperial design. It was a cathedral of bone and muscle. It pulsed with a heartbeat that could be heard over the Vox channels. On the surface of terror, the panic was absolute. The orbital plates were raining down. The traitor captains did not care about landing zones. They simply crashed their dropships into the hive cities. They used the hulls of their own cruisers as kinetic weapons. Millions of people died in the first hour. It was not a conquest. It was an extermination. Rogal Dorn stood in the Bab Bastion. The walls shook every second. Dust fell from the ceiling. He looked at the tactical hololith. It was a sea of red. The phalanx was out of position. It was near Mars, enforcing the blockade. Dorn ordered it to return. He ordered the engines to be pushed past the safety limits. He knew it would take hours. He did not have hours. He had minutes. The defensive lasers of the palace fired into the sky. They vaporized traitor ships. But for every ship they destroyed, 2 more took its place. The World Eaters led the assault on the walls. Angron was the first to land. He did not use a drop pod. He jumped from a Thunderhawk 50 meters above the ground. He landed on a bastion held by the Imperial army. The impact shattered the concrete. He was a blur of red gore. He killed with his axes. He killed with his teeth. The defenders broke. They had never seen a demon Primarch. They dropped their weapons and screamed. The fear was a physical wave. It washed over the Lionsgate spaceport. The traitor titans of Legio Mortis landed behind the lines. Their void shields were black. They walked through the hablocks like men walking through tall grass. The sound of their war horns cracked the glass in the Imperial dungeon deep underground. In the dungeon the air was freezing. Frost covered the golden machinery. The Emperor sat on the golden throne. His eyes were open, but they were blind. He was looking into the warp. He was holding back a tide of monsters that clawed at the webway gate. He felt the death of his people above. He felt the laughter of the 4 gods. They were close. They were circling the throne room. Malkador the Sigillite climbed the steps of the dais. He was a skeleton in robes. His skin was paper. He leaned on his staff. He touched the Emperor's knee. He did not speak with words. He spoke with his mind. He said it was time. He said the angel and the lion were coming, but they would be too late. Horus would burn the world before they arrived. The only way to stop the slaughter was to kill the War Master, and the only one who could kill the War Master was the Emperor. The Emperor looked at Malkador. He knew the cost. If he stood up, the gate would open. Someone had to take his place. Someone had to sit on the fire. Malkador smiled. It was a sad smile. He said he had served for a long time. He said he was ready to rest. The Emperor nodded. It was the hardest decision of his long life. He signaled the custodes. Constantin Valdor rushed to the throne. He helped the Emperor disconnect the cables. The golden armor sparked. The psychic backlash was immense. As the Emperor stood up, the room went dark. The machinery groaned. Malkador climbed onto the seat. He sat down. The cables lashed out like snakes. They plugged into his spine. They plugged into his eyes. Malkador screamed. His body arched. The flesh began to burn instantly. He was not a Primarch. He was a human. He was a perpetual, but he was mortal in strength. He held the gate. He held it with his will alone. He bought the Emperor time. The Emperor did not look back. He took his sword. He took his shield. He walked out of the dungeon. He looked like a god of war. He was 10 feet tall. His armor shone like a star. Valdor and 64 Heteron Guard followed him. They did not go to a ship. They used a teleportarium. They locked onto the signal of the Vengeful Spirit. The traitor flagship had lowered its shields. It was an invitation. It was a trap. Horus wanted his father to come. The teleportation beam whined. In a flash of light they were gone. They left the palace undefended. They left the war on the ground to dawn. They went to the heart of the sickness. They materialized on the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit. It was not a bridge anymore. It was a throne room of madness. The walls were made of screaming faces. The floor was deep in blood. The air smelled of sulfur and ozone. Horus sat on a throne of skulls. He was huge. He was swollen with the power of the Pantheon. His armor was black. His face was a mask of hate. He looked at the Emperor. He did not stand up. He smiled. He said he knew the Emperor would come. He said the Emperor was predictable. The Emperor did not speak. He raised his sword. The blade burst into fire. It was the only light in the room. The custodes charged. They were the finest warriors in history. They moved faster than the eye could follow. But they were fighting shadows. The sons of Horus Terminators emerged from the dark. They were mutated. They were strong. The battle was instant chaos. Valdor fought like a machine. He spun his spear. He cut heads from shoulders. But for every traitor he killed, the room shifted. The architecture itself was fighting them. Horus stood up. He raised his mace Worldbreaker. He swung it at the Emperor. The blow would have shattered a tank. The Emperor caught it on his shield. The impact created a shockwave that blew the windows out of the bridge. The atmosphere vented into space. No one cared. They were fighting in the void. They were fighting in the warp. The Emperor struck back. His sword cut through Horus's armor. It burned the flesh. But the flesh knit back together. Horus laughed. He said he was eternal. He said the Emperor was just a man. He unleashed a bolt of psychic lightning. It hit the Emperor in the chest. It threw him across the room. The Emperor crashed into a pillar of bone. The gold armor cracked. The Emperor stood up. He was bleeding. He looked old. The power of the throne had drained him. He was not at full strength. Horus was at the peak of his power. At the edge of the Sol system, the fabric of space tore open. The Pharos beam had done its work. The combined fleets of the Ultramarines, the Dark Angels, and the Blood Angels arrived. They did not decelerate. They came out of the warp at attack speed. The Lion was on the bridge of the Invincible Reason. He saw the devastation of terror. He saw the Vengeful Spirit in orbit. He saw the shields were down. He shouted the order to fire all engines. Sanguinius was on the red tear. He felt the psychic scream of his father. He knew the duel had begun. He knew he was late. He fell to his knees. He wept. He told his pilot to ram the Vengeful Spirit. He did not care about the ship. He had to get there. Guilliman was on the McCragger's honor. He was the calm one. He looked at the tactical plot. He saw that the traitor fleet was disorganized. They had not expected reinforcements this soon. Guilliman organized the firing solutions. He created a kill box. The loyalist armada slammed into the traitor rear guard. It was a hammer blow. Traitor ships exploded by the hundreds. The tide of the space battle turned instantly. But the space battle did not matter. Only the duel mattered. On the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit, the Emperor was losing. He could not bring himself to use his full power. He was holding back. He still saw his son inside the monster. He thought he could save him. He thought he could cut out the cancer without killing the patient. Horus saw this weakness. He exploited it. He hammered the Emperor with blow after blow. He broke the Emperor's ribs. He crushed the Emperor's arm. He taunted him. He showed him the future. He showed him a galaxy of war. He showed him the Imperium rotting from the inside. He said this was the Emperor's fault. He said the Emperor had lied to them. Then the teleport flare activated again. It was not a squad. It was a single figure. Sanguinius had not waited for his ship to dock. He had teleported blindly from the red tear as soon as they entered range. It was a suicide jump. He materialized between the Emperor and Horus. The angel was beautiful. His wings were white. His armor was gold. He held his sword. He looked at Horus. He did not see a brother. He saw a demon. Horus paused. He looked at Sanguinius. He offered him a place at his side. He said they could rule together. Sanguinius looked at the Emperor broken on the floor. He looked at Horus. He said only one word. No. Horus snarled. He did not hesitate. He swung the mace. Sanguinius was fast. He was the best duelist of them all. But he was tired from the war in Cygnus. He was weary from the journey. And Horus was a vessel of gods. Sanguinius dodged the first blow. He struck Horus in the chest. His sword pierced the black armor. It made a crack in the aegis, but it did not kill him. Horus caught Sanguinius by the throat. He lifted him up. The Emperor shouted. He tried to rise. He was too slow. Horus squeezed. The sound of the angel's neck breaking was louder than the guns. Sanguinius went limp. Horus threw him down like a broken toy. The angel lay dead on the bloody floor. His wings were bent. His eyes were open. The Emperor looked at his dead son. He looked at the sacrifice. And in that moment, the hesitation vanished. The father died. The Emperor remained. He realized there was no saving Horus. There was no redemption. There was only duty. The Emperor stood up. He did not feel pain anymore. He felt cold resolution. He gathered the psychic energy of the warp. He drew it into himself. He became a sun. The light was blinding. It burned the shadows out of the room. It burned the daemons hiding in the walls. Horus stepped back. He felt fear for the first time. He raised his mace. The Emperor did not use his sword. He spoke a word of power. It was a word that unmade reality. He focused it into a lance of pure thought. He drove it into Horus's heart. Horus screamed. It was not a scream of pain. It was a scream of souls being torn apart. The Chaos Gods tried to hold on to him. They poured more power into him. They tried to burn the Emperor. The Emperor stood firm. He walked through the fire. He reached out with his lightning claw. He grabbed Horus by the face. He looked into his eyes. He poured the light of the Astronomicon directly into his brain. He erased him. He did not just kill his body. He destroyed his soul. He burned him out of existence. Horus Lupercal disintegrated. He turned to ash. The armor fell empty to the floor. The wind stopped. The voices stopped. The Vengeful Spirit groaned. The presence that held the ship together was gone. The Emperor fell. He collapsed next to the body of Sanguinius. He was shattered. His body was a ruin. One eye was gone. His arm was severed. His internal organs were crushed. He lay in the silence. Valdor crawled toward him. Valdor was bleeding from a dozen wounds. He reached his master. He checked for a pulse. It was faint. It was a flutter. The Emperor whispered. He told Valdor to take him back. He said the throne was hungry. He said Malcador could not hold it. Rogal Dorn arrived on the bridge. He had teleported from the bastion when he saw the shields drop. He ran into the room. He saw the carnage. He saw the dead angel. He saw the empty armor of Horus. He saw his father broken on the deck. Dorn fell to his knees. He began to weep. He was a man of stone, but the stone cracked. Valdor shouted at him. He told him there was no time for grief. They had to move. They lifted the Emperor. They activated the teleporter. They left the ship of the dead. They arrived back in the dungeon. The room was hot. The air was burning. Malcador was a charred husk on the throne. He was crumbling to dust. The webway gate was shaking. The demons were pushing through. The Emperor commanded Dorn to put him on the throne. Dorn hesitated. He said it would kill him. The Emperor said he was already dead. He said it was the only way. Dorn lifted his father. They pulled the remains of Malcador off the seat. Malcador's dust scattered on the floor. The last thing the Sigillite did was transfer his remaining spark of life into the Emperor. It was a final gift. The Emperor sat. The cables connected. The golden light returned. The gate slammed shut. The demons were banished. The Emperor sighed. His eyes closed. He entered the eternal sleep. He was no longer a man. He was the Carrion Lord. The triumvirate fleet cleaned up the system. The death of Horus had broken the traitor legions. They went mad. They turned on each other. The World Eaters fought the Emperor's children. The Death Guard fled into the warp. The Loyalists hunted them down. They showed no mercy. They burned the traitor ships until the void was filled with wreckage. Robut Guilliman landed on Terra. He marched into the palace. He saw the ruin. He saw the bodies of the civilians. He met Dorn at the Eternity Gate. Dorn was covered in the Emperor's blood. He was staring at nothing. The lion landed. He was grim. He looked at the devastation and saw a failure of duty. They gathered in the throne room. The Emperor sat high above them. He was silent. The machinery hummed. The great work was over. The dream of a human webway was gone. The dream of a secular truth was dead. The Imperium had survived, but it had lost its soul. Guilliman looked at his brothers. He looked at the empty space where Sanguinius should be. He looked at the empty space where Pharos should be. He realized that the war was not over. The war had just changed. It would be a war of administration, a war of stagnation, a war of endurance. The Emperor spoke one last time into their minds. It was a whisper. It was fading. He told them to protect humanity. He told them that the darkness was deep. He told them that he would be the lighthouse. But he also told them the truth he had learned too late. He said that hope was the cruelest poison. He said they must rely on hate. Hate would keep them warm. Hate would keep them alive. The voice faded. The silence returned. The 10,000 years of suffering had begun. The small choice of waking up early had saved the Imperium from total destruction, but it had doomed the Emperor to a slower death. The timeline had shifted, but the destination was the same. The grim darkness of the far future had arrived, and there was only war. The smoke over the Imperial Palace did not clear for 6 months. The burial teams worked in shifts of 12 hours to clear the bodies from the Eternity Gate. They did not count the dead because the numbers were too high for the cogitators to process. It was estimated that 80% of the population of the throne world had perished in the short, brutal siege. Roboter Guilliman took the title of Lord Commander of the Imperium. He did not ask for it. He simply picked it up because it was heavy and no one else could lift it. He began the Great Scouring. The traitor legions were not allowed to retreat into the Eye of Terror in peace. The Lion and the Dark Angels hunted them. They burned the traitor homeworlds. They erased the records of the traitor Primarchs from the archives. It was a purge of memory, but the victory was hollow. The Imperium had survived, but it had changed. The secular truth was dead. In the slums of terror, a new faith was rising. People began to worship the man on the golden throne. They called him the God Emperor. The Lectitio Divinitatis, the book written by the traitor Lorgar, became the holy text of the loyalists. Guilliman tried to stop it. He tried to enforce logic. But logic does not comfort a grieving widow. Only faith does. The cult grew until it swallowed the government. The emperor became a god against his will. His silence was interpreted as divine judgment. His suffering was interpreted as sacrifice. The High Lords of Terror formed a council to interpret his will. Bureaucracy replaced vision. Fear replaced hope. The greatest tragedy was not the war itself, but the timeline that followed. Deep in the intergalactic void, the Great Devourer was moving. The Tyranid hive fleets had detected the Pharos Beacon 5,000 years earlier than in the original history. They were not drifting. They were accelerating. They would arrive in the galaxy in the 41st millennium, in the other timeline, but in this timeline, they would arrive in the 32nd. The Imperium was broken and bleeding, and about to face an enemy that ate stars. The Emperor sat on his golden chair and watched it all. He saw the ships closing in. He saw the fanaticism taking root. He saw the stagnation of the Mechanicus. He screamed into the warp, but he had no mouth. He was a prisoner of his own creation. The Golden Age was over. The age of the Dark Millennium had begun early. The history books would record that the Emperor woke up just in time to save humanity. But the Emperor knew the truth. He had woken up just in time to watch it die slowly. The recording ends here. The file is sealed. The clearance level is magenta. Thoughts for the day. Innocence proves nothing. Hope is the first step on the road to disappointment. Only in death does duty end.